Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Erin Canan. I'm the Vice President for Civic Engagement at Bard College, located in upstate New York. And I'm here with a number of our colleagues across our international network to talk about leadership in a time of crisis. This is a follow-on to a discussion we had about 5 years ago with a different makeup of panelists when we were talking about crisis during COVID times. And then since then, things seemed to have devolved even further. So we thought that it would be good to bring some folks together to really talk about what does it mean to be a leader in this moment, especially at higher education institutions around the world. So I'm going to turn the floor over to my colleague, Jonathan Becker, Executive Vice President at Bard College. And thank you all so much for joining us today. One note, I am going to put the bios of our panelists in the chat via a link. So if you want to look there, we're not going to introduce everyone's bios because we don't want to take up the time. And then also there is a question and answer option. So if you look down at the toolbar, you'll see the Q&A option. So we will be taking questions later in the panel. So thank you all for joining. Jonathan?
Fantastic. Thank you, Erin, for organizing this. Thank you to OSUN and the Talloires Network. And this is part of a continuation of the conversations, as Erin said, about universities as frontline responders. I do want to say that I remember the conversation. The Open Society University Network began in January of 2020, and then this thing called COVID began in March. And I remember the conversations then when that was the biggest challenge. But since then, we've seen numerous further challenges, beginning with coup in Myanmar and Dmytro from Parami University representing that. The Russian escalation in Ukraine, and Dmytro Sherengovsky is here, who can talk about the experience of Ukrainian Catholic University. Margee Ensign, who's the president of the American University of Bulgaria, which now is feeling the impact of the changes in the United States right now, but she also has a distinguished history in Africa, which she might draw upon. And President Fadlo Khuri from the American University of Beirut, who is feeling, as many American universities are abroad, no doubt, the impacts of the changes in the United States, but have also had numerous challenges in Lebanon across these last 5 years and in time previously. So I couldn't think of a more distinguished and better panel to discuss these issues right now. What we're going to do is we're going to begin with each panelist speaking for something like 8 minutes, talking about topic of leadership in a time of crisis, drawing on what that means to them from their current situation and their past career, and offering some thoughts on ways of moving forward. Then we'll have some questions, follow-up questions within the panel. And then finally, we'll open up the questions to the audience. So we want to feature our panelists rather than our moderators. And without further ado, we're going to begin with President Margee Ensign, who's the president of the American University of Bulgaria. And thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Jonathan and Erin and Bard and the Talloires Network and OSUN for gathering us together at this critical moment as we all face enormous challenges as higher education is challenged around the world. I've reflected a lot on what I might say that might be helpful here. As Jonathan said, I've had the privilege to be a US president for the past 15 years in 3 different continents, sub-Saharan Africa, now Southeastern Europe, and in the United States. And there's 3 things that really come to mind that I think were helpful during all 3 presidencies. The first one might surprise you, but it's the importance of community, the community that we live in, and being deeply engaged and involved with the community members. The second is communication. That won't surprise anyone, but I think we really need to think carefully about how we communicate. And Jonathan knows me well. He won't be surprised that my third C is civic engagement, because I really think we have to reflect, all of us as educators at this moment, on our profound responsibility to prepare students for the world they will live in and it's fundamentally different, I think, than what all of us experience. So very briefly on community, in Nigeria, I can say quite honestly, I don't think we would have survived if we didn't have a community network. Before the crisis began, and I encourage every president and leader on this call, make sure you have deep contacts with your top community leaders, and they might surprise you. In Northeast Nigeria, our community leaders were religious leaders, the Christian and Muslim leaders. There was only one NGO in the entire area. And before Boko Haram began its rampage, we developed a very strong relationship with those leaders. They were the ones to give us the early warning signal that something was emerging not far north from us in Northeast Nigeria. And of course, that was the beginning of Boko Haram. They called university leaders to a meeting where we heard firsthand what was emerging. We were in an area without great communication, as some of you may be. We're not all able to communicate 24/7 with each other. So those community leaders were essential not only in giving us an early warning, living through 6 or 7 years of that crisis, they helped us implement the humanitarian response and the security response. If you're facing a security issue, I will also say, and I know he's on this call, the director of our security was a full-time faculty member. He was deeply trusted, not just by the university, but by the entire community. And when it was all over and we drove north to see the remnants, people came out of the bush to thank him for keeping them alive. So that gets to the second point, which is communication. We all rely on digital communication at this point, but there is no substitute for knowing as many people we can at our university and in our community. And I know we're all working hard, but I learned knowing faculty by name, their background, being able to identify them, knowing students, knowing staff, telling people how much we value them. When you have to make those very hard decisions, they need to know you and trust you. What comes to mind for me is in Nigeria, gathering everyone together to decide, do we evacuate or not? And looking into their eyes, I knew we had a deep relationship because we had communicated honestly with everyone. And the final piece is civic engagement. And why? Why in the world would we talk about civic engagement during a time of crisis? I think we're at a different moment in higher education, and I think we need to make sure students have not only the knowledge and skills and the attitude, but the confidence and the courage to take on the very hard challenges that we're facing now and what they will face in their careers. In all 3 universities that I've had the privilege of working at, but the most in Nigeria, we had to say to everyone, to every department, you have to take on a community project now. Whether it's figuring out how to educate 20,000 orphans who are outside our gate, whether it's feeding 50,000 people a day, what are the logistics for that? Every department came through with impactful and life-changing projects. And I can say, honestly, those are the students leading that very big country now because they know they can do it. They have the confidence and the courage. And I would ask everyone on this call to look into a new report, Every Student, Every Degree, it's called. And there's an emerging network in the United States. There's always been a network, but this is a little more solid, I think. AACU and others are sponsoring it. And it lays out not only why it's important for every student not to do community service, but within their major to do a deep project. And the research is showing from these high impact practices how students change. It's not just knowledge and skills. It's the ability to deal with diversity, to build bridges, to solve problems, to stay in school, and as I said, to have the courage to take on what will be in front of them. So I'm happy to answer questions. I think, Jonathan, my time's about up, but I really look forward to hearing from our other panelists and your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margee. That's wonderful. Our next speaker is Dr. Fadlo Khuri from American University of Beirut.
Hello, friends. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. It's a pleasure and a privilege to join this panel. I think Margee said it beautifully. I'll agree with community, communication, and civic engagement. Before I zoom in to, you know, the things that have mattered to us from the perspective of leadership in crisis and what we've learned at specifically the American University of Beirut. I think in the interest of complete honesty, we have to acknowledge the sea change that came in what's expected of university leadership, at least in the United States, after the 60s and 70s were a period of great activism and societal engagement. Late 70s, I'd say there was some exhaustion certainly on the part of boards. And then the 90s, the endowments and the investments grew so quickly that what we're seeing now is at least part of a very predictable pattern, because boards saw that they had massive growth in endowment, increase in responsibilities, and they decided to, for the most part, I'm not talking about the group here, select leaders who are managers of expectations for stakeholders. The basic premise became no margin, no mission. Very cautious and conservative approach, which I fundamentally disagree with. As I've said many times to trustees, and fortunately less frequently to my own trustees here, it's your mission that drives your margin. And so I think the most important thing really of all is adherence to the mission. When I took this job in 2015, it was my sense as a trustee that perhaps while we did research, patient care, community service, and teaching increasingly well at the American University of Beirut, perhaps the mission was not as much a focus of what we did and why we did it. We didn't ask why often enough. And I think that really led to a number of steps where we started to examine why do we do things and how do we get to where we're supposed to. Focusing just briefly on Margee's 3 points, for us at the American University of Beirut in Lebanon, we're held to a different standard than any other university. Whatever we do, right or wrong, is immediately scrutinized, which is good. You know, think of Harvard and Cambridge, or in the United States these days, a far more powerful and resourced and older university, but they're scrutinized at a different level than anyone else. And I say this with all honesty as a Yale and Columbia graduate. So you have to get used to that, and to deal with that, you have to communicate constantly, and especially with your community. There have been any number of dangerous situations that we've dealt with. Jonathan very kindly talked about the last 5-6 years, when of course we've had an economic collapse in Lebanon, an uprising, which led to the failure to establish capital controls, and then the third worst financial collapse of the last 160 years now. The pandemic, we've had the port explosion, which is the 4th worst non-nuclear explosion in the last 100 years, and challenge after challenge beyond that. So paradoxically, the university has emerged perhaps considerably stronger. I'll give you an easy number. In scholarship alone, in 2019, before we had to do layoffs and before many of our faculty left, especially after the port explosion, we had some, let's say, 1,100 faculty on the professorial track, of whom 40 were in the most cited 2% in the world. Now we have 800 professorial track faculty, 64 of them are in that category. So one of the things you have to do is to be intentional. And going back to the why are we recruiting and investing in scholars and researchers? Because they happen to be a critical part of what a university does. It's not just research institutes that do research, it's all of us. And to emphasize research, not at the expense of teaching, but in synergy with teaching, was a clear message that we made to the community. And we had to communicate again and again, and sometimes over-communicate, and sometimes we got it wrong, and we had to acknowledge openly that what we communicated was well-intentioned, might have been highly relevant as far ago as 1 week ago, for example, during the pandemic. But now, guess what? We're closing the university because the cases went from 6 to a couple of hundred, and we do have individuals who are infected. So this is really and nimbleness you need in communication and your relationship with community. I want to focus a little bit on service and on civic engagement. So this has been something that for me has been a blessing. We have a formidable center of civic engagement. They're always the first and community service. These are the first people who responded at the port explosion. They helped vaccinate people outside the university's framework, right, including prisoners in Lebanon's harshest prison, Palestinian and Syrian refugees who are beyond the national purchase plan for vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. And what we learned is that civic engagement and community service cannot be thought of in 2020, much less 2025, as an elective or as an extracurricular. It is a co-curricular, and that's why we've developed courses. Look, in the last 7 years alone, we had more than 2,800 scholars engaged in more than 8,500 projects. Some of those have been published. More importantly, they've made a real impact, from lighting towns and northern villages to, as you heard, vaccinating people, to helping rebuild destroyed residences, all the way to helping people at the time of the earthquakes in Syria and in Turkey. So while this spans a very, very broad set of principles, if it's good enough for you to do it, it should be more than good enough for you to learn from it. So we've developed a series of courses for credit, not for credit, as part of the curriculum, a 1 credit outline, which is a prerequisite course, which is fundamentals of community engagement, and then 5 option pathways that are anything from volunteering to community-based internships to community service projects, capstone projects, or service learning courses. We truly believe that learning how to do community service and how to intentionally be effective at civic engagement is the responsibility of the 21st century university. It is not optional. It is not extracurricular. So I'm going to end in my 8 minutes by going back to why we do this. I believe 10 years after I had the opportunity to become president of the American University of Beirut, we're much more intentional, we're much more mission-oriented, and we're more excellent. All 3 are connected. We're more excellent because we're more intentional and more mission-oriented. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khuri. Our next speaker is the president of Parami University, Dmytro.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, Margee and Fadlo. Really appreciate the insights from both of you. I am a very young president, okay? And so really not coming with a lot of experience into this job. I was founding the university at a time of a great hope in Burma, in Myanmar. Things were going out very well, smoothly, and that was during the time when the UK was hitting with the Brexit, and the US under Trump, the first administration, Trump administration, and many of my friends were even flooding into Burma. They were even considering to relocate. So, you can imagine when Myanmar was hit with a military coup in 2021, early 2021, and since then we had been hit with so many crises nonstop. The coup released this whole flood of crises, one after another. The first is, of course, the whole national identity, political situation, and the displacement of the people. And with that, what was following after the coup was just the nationwide protests and civil war going on. And this civil war is ongoing nonstop as well. And to make the matters worse, Burma has been hit with so many natural disasters as well. We were hit with flooding 7-8 months ago. Many of our students were affected. And as recently as a month ago, we were hit with the biggest, the strongest earthquake in a century in Burma. So in all of these crises, and I just want to share 3 points perhaps throughout my leadership journey across these crises. First, as I mentioned, as a young president, it's very difficult if I were to decide a lot of things on my own without much input and advice and consultation and counsel from my trustees. Okay, and so what I did, decided to do, was to have principles yet pragmatic. Right, that was very helpful. After the military coup, I was faced with I faced a lot of challenging decisions that I've got to make. And throughout all of it, I also realized that as the president, right, I'm not going to be a philosopher and just sit on, these moral values. I really have to be very pragmatic on what is best for my community, what is best, what is the right thing to do at the same time. So as a leader, we've got to be principled yet pragmatic, right? Nobody is going to be perfect. And I've got to, that was a very challenging testing moment for me, right? I came out of grad school, I came out of a liberal arts college and all that. And, as a liberal arts student, we were very, very just philosophically very strong in terms of what we stand for. But once you get into this leadership position, you've got to understand there are always pragmatic decisions you've got to make. So that was one. And throughout the crises, the second thing that I did was, Margee said that, Fadlo said communicating. But in communication, I constantly remind the mission of Parami among my trustees, among my faculty, students, and not least important, the staff. Constantly reminding the mission of why we exist. And reminding that among my students, faculty, and staff really helps consolidate the entire Parami University faculty behind one mission. And that really helps us go through all the challenges. When we had the military coup, when we have national civil war going on, our students and our staff are not shy away from doing things that even pose a danger to themselves. And I don't even have to ask them. They just come forward to do things on their own. When we had an earthquake, within 24 hours, our staff and our students volunteered to help out, right? All the university have to do is fundraise. And I was fundraising, but then they were on the ground. They were putting in hours against all odds. Even when there were security issues threatening them at night, they were going up and doing all the duties. So that was the second thing, constantly reminding the mission among my faculty, students, and staff. The third thing that we had been doing, thank God, before the military coup, but even more so after the military coup, was building the resilience through our network and collaboration. Open Society University Network is such a strong supporter behind our work, BART, of course, and all our collaborative partners that we have. And that network supports a lot of our work. Student activities that we created just in support of our students, learning hubs where our students live wouldn't be possible without our partners on the ground. A lot of our international exchanges wouldn't be possible without the network. And even though we have to operate online, right? Because of the network, our student retention is high. The students love the community. They felt like even though they're learning online, they feel like they are being part of the community. And so as a leader, I work on these three things constantly throughout my leadership journey amidst all the crises. So I hope that, I believe my time is up, and I'll give the floor back to Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Jamutun. I really appreciate it. Our final speaker in this opening session is Vice-Rector Dmytro Sherengovsky from Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, Ukraine. Thank you, Dmytro.
Thank you, Jonathan. Dear colleagues, dear Jonathan, dear Aaron, distinguished presidents, and everyone who is present here. So it's my honor and pleasure to be today and to speak about the topic that indeed resonates deeply with all of us, like this leadership in times of crisis. And I will not tell something new. I think that the panelists covered fantastically a number of different things that resonates what we are doing here in Ukraine during the times of war with Russia. But I would only like to stress that we see what we are talking today is that our institutions, our universities, not merely institutions of knowledge, but these communities of purpose. And that's, I think, it's a driving thing. And that drives us a lot, that understanding of our mission. And thinking about the leadership in a time of crisis, I'd actually want to refer to the book Leadership in Turbulent Times by Doris Goodwin. And she's starting like with this book with the words, "Are leaders born or are they made? Do they shape the moment, or does the moment shape them?" And that is a crucial question. And at UCU, we believe that these moments of darkness demand leaders who not only endure, but also need to illuminate. And I perfectly remember when the Russians' full-scale invasion into Ukraine began, UKU leadership had to do a pivot from the strategic planning to survival, but also from administration to moral imagination. And we definitely witnessed tragedy, we witnessed displacement, destruction, we witnessed trauma. More than like 180 of our students had to flee abroad. That is a huge number for us because we are a small institution for around 2,900 students. More than 110 members of our community, not only students and faculty members, they're still fighting on the front line. But that's a really traumatic for the community. We have more like the 25 people who were already killed by Russian missile strikes. Even on Lviv, on my city, there is located like 1,000 kilometers from the front line, but we are not secure in any case. So we face that tragedy, but also we witness resilience, we also witness solidarity, and we also witness a great personal leadership of many people on the grassroots level that indeed reflects the slogan of our institution, of our university, that is witnessing, serving, and communicating. These three words that were already talked, but indeed this is our slogan. Let me share a few points of what helped us and me personally within this journey. At that period of time, I was Vice-Rector for academic affairs. I was responsible for academic things, and only like 2 years ago, I switched to the outreach and to the social engagement. So I would mainly said that strategic planning is important. The complexity theory suggests that in these uncertain systems, you shouldn't strive to achieve your aim in a straight line. But what you should do, you should move step by step to the points that are really certain. And definitely, when we think about the crisis of war, we might think that planning is impossible, but it is indispensable, actually. Almost once months before the full-scale invasion, we actually formed a group of the managers responsible for planning in case of war. And we developed 4 scenarios, and the full-scale invasion was, well, the fourth one, the so-called red scenario. I had a background in conflict studies, so I was really skeptical about Russian full-scale invasion. I could tell more than 1,000 different reasons why it was a bad idea, but actually that happened. But that's actually turned my understanding that even if you are skeptical, but if you see that the probability of something that need to happen, you need to plan it. You definitely need to plan it. And also strategic leadership does not mean the predicting the future for sure, but it means preparing for it. And at the Ukrainian Catholic University, so our immediate response at that time was actually including the transformation of our campus into shelters. We hosted over 1,000 displaced persons from in the only spring semester and one semester from eastern, from southern part of Ukraine, and that's included the families of our students, people with special needs, and different volunteering, especially medical organizations who operate within our campus. But at the same period of time, we also laid a grand work for transformation. So we didn't stop our classes, but we transformed that using the service learning methodology that you talked a lot about today. So, and that indeed helps. So we practice it since 2019. It's one of the cores in our university. And we see that our courses were adapted to provide this support to IDPs, humanitarian engagement. And indeed, as Dr. Khuri said, it's not the elective anymore. It's the core, the study how we can serve to our community. But we also experience that the bottom-up resilience and empowerment is important. So crises do not only demand decisions from the above, they call from the initiative from below. And that is why the top management, we all concentrated on the security issue and for facilitation of what's going on the campus. And we actually asked everybody, so please do your initiatives. Do whatever you wish. If you need our help, we can definitely provide it. And that was a wonderful story because people move more faster. They were much more motivated to act and to experiment with their own solutions. Some of the initiatives failed. Some were stopped. Some were transformed and integrated into university modus operandi today. But this was like how the people think that they are really, really needed. So in our case, we should also understand that leadership is not hierarchical. It's very, very relational. So it's very, very feasible for every part of the community to be engaged in some of the cases. Partnership is the third point that was highly discussed today. And for us, it's critically important. Just because of partnership, we sustained our institution. We made it possible to help our students, faculty members, but also we use partnership as a model to speak to the world what is happening. I think many of the universities are doing that. But what is also important that we also help our, within different networks and our partnership, we help other Ukrainian institutions that face much more dramatic killings and destruction. So we use our possibility to be a hub, to be a social hub, to be a partner hub, to help others if we feel that we are in the situation that we are pretty much not secure, but to some extent safe. And especially the global partnership. So it's indeed create a culture of this partnership, a culture of the networking. And now we are trying to use these networks to spread the words. And I usually saying that being global means going where it hurts, meaning that we send our knowledge that is mostly needed, not just for Ukraine, but all over the world. And finally, I want to finish with the fourth important lesson from that. It's actually empathy. So leadership, as wartime reminds us, is not the suppression of our emotion. This is a transformation of emotion into the meaning. Fear into the courage, anger into responsibility, and our losses into service to those who need it. So that is why I think that the most powerful emotion for us was and still is a hope. And hope is not about optimism. Actually, this year in OSUN is a year of hope. So we choose every year some topic, and this year we choose to talk about hope. And this year for Catholic Church is about hope. So we're working also for that. And hope is about optimism. And I just want to finalize in quoting the Ukrainian human rights defender and Nobel Prize laureate Alexander Matvichuk, who paraphrases Václav Havel in very beautifully that hope is not the conviction that everything will turn out well, but this is belief that our efforts matter, no matter what the outcome is. So hope taught us to play a very, very long game. And finalize, indeed, I want to turn back to what I started. So are leaders born or made? Perhaps both. So, but above all, they are revealed in this crisis. And indeed, for Khuri, we do believe that crisis is a perfect time for leaders, but leadership is not about heroism. It's about witnessing honestly, about serving faithfully, and about communicating courageously, that even in the darkest hours, our university still remains as a big beacon of the human dignity and hope. And I want this feeling to be shared loudly. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists. I'm going to offer a couple of questions, and you can feel free to respond specifically to those questions or to comment on other things people have said. I have two in mind, and then we're going to go to Q&A. So folk online, please feel free to put questions in the chat. My first question sort of strikes on a few of the things that Fadlo talked about, which are about it's about the balance between civic engagement and third mission of the university and the core academic mission. So a question that I often hear is, you're doing all this do-gooder stuff, or you're thinking about these other things, and it's a subject of critique, both from sort of a rigorous academic perspective, right? Which isn't university about the learning and dissemination of knowledge, and from sort of a more partisan political approach, which says, you're politicizing the university and thus exposing it to risks, in some cases, if you're talking about endowments, but risks from political interference and so forth. So I'm wondering how we wrestle with this notion of universities' responses in times of crisis versus educational mission. Where do you see a juxtaposition? Where do you see them overlapping? How do you handle when you are posed this question, which I'm sure all of you are? I'm going to go to Margee first, since she was first, and we'll just go down the line, and if she's okay with that, and then if you want to comment on anything anyone else said, please go ahead. And again, reminders: the question Q&A is open.
Thanks, Jonathan. First, let me thank my colleagues. I'm so inspired by what you all said in different circumstances and your courage and your empathy. It's extraordinary to learn from you. So there's three things I want to comment on very briefly, Jonathan. One, two of you talked about, and I didn't, and it's the mission that is our glue. It's our mission that drives what we should be doing. And you all have different missions. Our mission where we are right now is to educate democratic and ethical leaders. It's the reason I was honored to take this position, because that's what's being threatened right now. That makes a lot of people nervous, and it might be useful to have a conversation among us about what that means to be living those values at a time when that is in particular what's being questioned. The second thing I want to talk about, and Dmytro, you really were very insightful about this. In our heads all the time, we're doing what if planning, right? Scenario planning. It's something we should talk about more, how we do that, because I think that might be helpful to others who are facing their first crisis. We just have had to make it second nature, because if you are in charge of the university, every day you're playing 2 or 3 scenarios in your head. The third thing is empathy. We don't talk about it enough. And that's really, I think, what I was driving at about community and communication. That has to be embedded in both of those things. So, Jonathan, to your question, why in the world do we separate learning in a community, learning how to solve problems, trying to apply the knowledge we're learning in the classroom? Why do we think that's separate from learning, right? And so I think those of us who've gone through this and who have made civic engagement a core part of our academic and practical learning, we need to talk about it more, and the importance of testing what students are learning. I will just share one example from Nigeria. I was teaching a development class when all of this began, and our first project was to feed very hungry orphans outside the gates of the university. And one of my students' father was the owner of the largest oil company in Nigeria. And when I told them we were going to walk to this place and see if we could learn more about why education was failing in the country, he was furious. He had to walk. How dare I do that to him? He went down, and I watched him as he interacted with these young people and gave out food and began to teach reading, particularly to a young girl. The next week in class, he stood up and again was furious. And I thought he was going to say, why in the world did you do that? And what he said are words that stay with me forever. He said, how is it possible in my country that these young kids have never seen a book? And I said to him, it's your country. You help me understand that. And what are you going to do about it? And that young man now is working in that area. So our responsibility as educators is not only knowledge, Jonathan, it's applying the knowledge, testing themselves in what all of us on this call have experienced are very difficult circumstances. And most presidents would say, don't allow students to be put in those risky environments. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. And again, I go back to what I said at the beginning, our responsibility now as educators is to prepare this generation for what's ahead, the knowledge, the skills, the confidence. They get confidence from civic engagement. They figure out they can solve problems, and that gives them courage to move forward. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Margee. Dr. Khuri?
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, friends. I've learned a lot just listening. I'm thinking about this canard that's being propagated out there, not in this group, which is that there's a choice. The choice is either they learn the classical curriculum and they become technologically proficient, or they do experiential learning and community engagement and community service, civic engagement. I think it's incorrect, because to pick up on something Margee pointed out, and maybe just hitting on something that both Dmytro and Kyaw said, the students learn a lot both ways, and no two students, if you've seen one student, you've seen one student. You're learning patterns. But candidly speaking, when I started here, we had outstanding graduates. And if I had heard any criticisms, our students get hired. Next year will be a 160-year-old university, very good reputation for all the right reasons. If I heard criticisms from major leaders in industry or academia, they'd say, well, your graduate wants to run the office or run the department before they've even started. So that forced us to reflect on one of the core values. And this is, I think, a mistake universities make, which is they say, what do we teach? We teach leadership. If you had 8 billion leaders on the planet, you'd have a real problem. What we really teach and what we want to teach is citizenship, accountability, responsibility, and empowerment. And in fact, the civic engagement, the community service, and the didactic learning are all complementary parts of being a citizen, and when need be, a leader, because you can be a leader on one issue and a follower on something else. I'm not just talking about formalizing this education, but I'm talking about sharing this education. One of the more heartening things, if anything is heartening, about this attack on higher education that we're witnessing in the United States, and it's not restricted to the US. We're feeling it, the British universities, everyone's feeling it, I'm sure Margee's feeling it, is that in a very competitive environment, the universities, you used to see at least the oldest universities in North America or in Britain standing together on principle when their principles were not threatened. And yet this time, with everything going on, the first time the publics and privates got together under the ushering of the 64 most selective universities in North America, I'm going to be blunt, say the public said, well, this is really your problem. This is how far I think we've gone in our competitiveness, but not our collegiality. And yet when Harvard stepped up, I want to point out, Jonathan, that it was only, when it was George Floyd or the Muslim ban, everyone was criticizing. But when it was time to take a statement on moving the US embassy to Israel, to Jerusalem, but not doing anything for the Palestinians, the only two college presidents in the US that got hammered by President Trump were Leon Botstein and I, right? We each made a statement. And so there's a lesson there. Now that Harvard has taken the position, the other universities are recognizing not so much that it's time to stand up and fight, but it is time to stand up and look at what we have in common and what we do that's most important. And if nothing else, I'm thankful that this is such a moment where we can all agree that clearly teaching civics, teaching citizenship, teaching community engagement, as well as the classical academics is critical, that if we just start teaching technology and job skills, we're going to be shortchanging our students. And to end the story without taking too long, the reason I feel quite good about the direction we've taken the last few years, emphasizing the humanities and liberal arts more, and adding this experiential learning component is in fact that issue that employers identified is no longer an issue. We've improved in the employability of our folks, and our students, faculty, and staff all talk about being good citizens, not just of this country, but of the world. So again, going back to the mission and being honest enough to be critical of yourself. And that's where, to go to a point that Kyaw made, the board is critical. They are the permanent custodians of the university. If you've got a board that wants to invest in fundamental change and doing what you need to get to where you want, you're halfway there. You got a board that's divided or saying, well, wait a minute, this may hurt the endowments or upset the donors. Well, unfortunately, you're going to be like my alma mater, Columbia University then.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So let's go to Dmytro. And I do want to say we are seeing questions in the chat, and we will cycle to them in a moment. So people don't. I see 3 now. Please keep them coming. Dmytro.
Thank you. So perhaps my perspective on this is that our students are already in the context, right? I mean, they're already in a place where they cannot help themselves but engaged in civic projects, right? What they learn in class, they're already living it. And then so, for me as the president and as the faculty or, as the leader of the institution, I don't have to do even much convincing among the students to be involved or the staff to be involved in civic engagement projects. They are in the making of through it all. So for me, that's that. But for them, that's that. For me, when before Harvard, made this stand to fight against the Trump administration, I was writing this article, drafting an article to be published in ASCNU. And I myself am not in a best immigration status here in the United States, right? I have to be very careful of what I say, and then I have to, again, I'll go back to the first point: principles yet pragmatic. And I have a set of principles. I feel like I need to voice my opinions, but at the same time, I have to pick the battles, right? I am leading the institution, and if I'm arrested, there are going to be a lot of other people that are going to be affected. But still, I want to voice my opinions. And then so in the article, I did voice my opinions and be scared. But that was, to me, a great, civic exercise on my own as well, of whether I should do it and not do it. And I believe that many of us students face the same kind of dilemma all the time in Burma, whether they should say it, whether they should not say it, whether they should get involved or they should not get involved. One most recent example is the earthquake response, right? There is still military curfew imposed by the Burmese military on our students, on our community, and our students stepped up and developed the courage against all odds to be able to deliver aid to much needed, you know, to the affected areas, which are in need of life-saving materials. And so we wouldn't be able to do all of these without the students and the staff who really believe in the mission of Parami as, frontline responder whenever we face with crises throughout our story. So with that, I'll give the floor back. Thank you.
Dmytro?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll try to add something new, because I do agree what my colleagues have spoken, so I just want to waste the time. So I think that it's important, let me build on that it doesn't contradict. So definitely we see that community engagement is a part of the identity of many of the institutions. And we should also understand that within the educational process, we do not only teach, so to create knowledge or give the knowledge. We do not only build skills, but also we build attitudes. And I want to stress on this building of attitudes. I think that's one of the crucial part of the contemporary education that sometimes is not prioritized by the universities. Given attitude is and building attitudes, so building the ability of students to have the attitude to different things is of great importance. And you can't study it in the books. So sometimes, but in the times when we prioritize our critical thinking, so to have the ability to make a decision, what is your understanding of some of the things, it's perfectly built when you are engaged. So that then you make then you feel it. So we usually say that you are not only speaking with language of your mind, but also you're speaking with the language of your heart, but also you're speaking in the language of your hands. So and that actually build the attitude towards this present world. So and in the time of crisis, in the time of war, it's extremely important, because in the time of crisis, everything is white and black. It's very easy because everything is white and black. But then the crisis ends, or war ends, and then you come to the gray zone. And within the gray zone, it's not so easy. It's not so easy. And that's good if you're values driven. So you have your values and you know what to do. But sometimes you give your values a test, and you need to understand how you can behave. You need to have this attitude, and I think that's the engagement helps a lot, because you face the troubles, you face traumas, and you see those people who are hurted, both physically, mentally, and you need to deal with that. And I think as a part of the educational process, it's extremely important, because then you break a lot of biases in your mind. So and you become to understand what you really think, what you really feel, and what you can actually execute during these gray zone times. We see this in a number of cases within our classes. So there are many of the wonderful stories when the students are, for example, who are engaged into the law clinics, that they're treating and helping late veterans, or the IDPs, or for example, the psychological health care, who students also, with the help of their faculty members, they give the psychological relief and help This is a part of curriculum, but they give it to who is needed. So they need to come to the understanding that they have biases and they need to overcome that. And it's what sometimes like the classical discipline can help you. And finally, when you come to the communities who were like simply occupied and now they are liberated, and you see zero life there, and you need to come there and start from the beginning. And there's very tough classes because you have the attitude that you can trust your country sometimes, and you can trust institutions, and you can trust somebody. And sometimes the trust is people lost their trust. So you need not only to work to study what you can do, like build a strategic plan, or for example to work with the water management when you have a class for food security and you need to work with the water manager, but you at the same period of time you need to bring this trust. And this is these soft skills that they're not present in the classical education. So I think that like this engagement is very vital. So we talked today that within this the classical triple helix model, when we have the universities, when we have business, and we have the government. So we add like this, we keep civil society there. And now this third mission becomes really of great importance that drive us to do that. We want this social transformation, and this social transformation and the social innovation is coming only when indeed when we have the students and the young professionals or later professionals who are equipped with ethics of having their own opinion, how to deal with the traumas and troubles and what need to be done. So I'll also probably here, I just want to stress that attitude is important.
Thank you. I think, you know, that we've had a number of, I want to ask one more question before on the side. I will say one of them though is about mental health, and I just want to say two things. One of them is this this panel itself is salutary, I would have to say, for my own mental health, and I appreciate the comments of people, and this sort of leads to my question in a way, and we've touched on this, but I think it's important to delve in just a little bit further. I would say, generally speaking, but especially now, when the United States is becoming, at best, an illiberal democracy in the Orbanian sense. But generally speaking, universities aren't very good at cooperating with each other, right? And that is internally and externally. You know, the former chancellor of Berkeley described the university, you know, university professoriate as a collection of individual entrepreneurs united by collective grievance over parking, right? But we've heard some of this before, and Harvard has been invoked, and Fadlo, you know, spoke about his speaking out with Professor Leon Botstein, and some folk are mobilizing in different ways. But why don't we teach things like collective action, and why are universities seemingly bad at that, or are they bad at that? And can you offer some examples in when universities have cooperated with each other for either these grand challenges of democracy or smaller challenges that you faced, and what would you recommend about what we can do to work with each other? Margee?
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. I disagree that we're not working with each other. I mean, maybe we were slow to respond, but look at that AAC and U statement that started with very few of us signing the statement on constructive engagement. I think there's close to 600 now, right? And it's not revolutionary, but it just says, you know, the academic freedom is the basis of our work. Education is the basis of a society. Let's make sure that we preserve and work together to preserve these things. So that's a small effort, but I think the movement is beginning because the threat we are sharing equally on these big challenges. Just, you know, for those of us who are overseas, perhaps we communicate and work more with the universities around us out of necessity. We certainly did in Nigeria when one of the public universities was literally bombed and shut down. The whole university moved to our little campus and kept their classes going, and we put up their students. And so in crisis, you extend yourself. In the US, we haven't faced this kind of existential crisis to academic freedom and to what we believe in. But we have to respond. Again, we'll just end with one story. When we publicized that we had signed that little AAC&U document, it's minor, right? It's a statement of our values. It's a statement of our missions. It was students who came to me and said, we're so grateful that the university stood up. And again, I think if we're focused on what students need at this critical moment in time, they have to see us taking those stands. They have to see us standing up for our missions. And we can no longer think that education is simply passing on the knowledge from the past. It is preparing them for the future that everybody on this call is dealing with. And we have to really not only reconfigure, as all of us have done in our various institutions, but that's the message that has to be shared, because I think we're at a very special moment in history. And for some of these things, we're not going back. On the mental health one, just very quickly, we established a program in resilience. We worked with an American university, Tulane University, and their top people came in and trained up faculty and staff and students, and with round one, and there's a strong demand to continue it. So I think building resilience, building on the knowledge of experts have on how you become resilient people is critically important.
Thank you very much. Fadlo?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I mean, I do think it's a fair question. We've worked together perhaps less than we used to. I mentioned that AAUP, but I do think in the US things are coalescing. But Margee is correct. Abroad, we have no choice, and we work together because none of us is complete. And we're the oldest university, the University of Beirut, by some margin in the MENA region or Africa or anywhere else. So when I started almost 10 years ago, after the mandatory visits to the Prime Minister and the Speaker of Parliament, I went out of my way to go to the second oldest university, the University of Saint-Joseph, which is a French Jesuit chartered university, to the Lebanese American University, the other American university here, to others, to meet them, to at least build a local coalition. And that was critical because at one point we had a government of Lebanon for the first time in this country's 124-year-old history that decided to go after the two premier universities and sort of the high-end universities, and there was safety in numbers there. I went back to what Leon Botstein and I each wrote when the president took that political decision. And I've read our statements, and neither of them was an attack on President Trump in 2017 or 18, even though it was characterized by the mainstream media as an attack. And I want to segue to the idea that we shouldn't be cooperating on negative things. Instead of just taking a defensive action and counterattacking the administration, we should be emphasizing that we are taking seriously the big issues and the shortcomings that we have as universities everywhere. We are responsible to address to the public the question that, especially in America, but in Britain and here, is basically a part of a real query and an attack even on universities, which is, why do you have large endowments? What do you do with all that money? How are you improving the students' lives? We shouldn't be afraid to show where we're succeeding and where we're failing. And one of the places that I consider is the battleground is mental health. Mental health is a bigger issue today than it was when, at least when Margee and I went to college, or Jonathan, when you went to college, probably even when our two younger presidents. This is one of the reasons mental health is an issue. The younger generation doesn't have breaks. They have this very attractive world that they can live much of their lives in this virtual world. And we, if we're honest with ourselves, we're not the most disciplined at regulating cell phone or computer use. So to have these unrealistic expectations saying, don't use AI for this and don't look at your phone, it's some things that I used to believe in myself, you learn, are wrong. And in my view, the data suggests that the more you expand, the more you add complexity, the more you need to add exponential mental health support. I say this as someone who invested in a major way in mental health support. When we first got here, we built up our counseling center and mental health center. After the port explosion and the economic collapse, virtually everyone in that unit left. So we had to rebuild it. But we didn't rebuild the exact same unit we had. We built a better unit, I think, a smarter unit with more community support. Not just more access to the medical center, but with more counselors and more time and more virtual meetings, recognizing that students were suffering from pandemics and other things. And one of my happier moments in my decade here was when the faculty came to us at a Senate meeting and said, we're concerned that we're not good at recognizing symptoms of significant mental health challenges or distress. So that was, for me, my eureka moment. Here, we're fortunate enough to have a faculty and staff eventually who want to help and who admit that they're not the greatest in the world. So for me, this is, of course, always a stressful time for our students and for all of us, if we're honest. There's nothing wrong with working on getting rid of the stigma and enhancing the support for mental health. And part of it is to acknowledge diversity of opinion. And I'm going to end by responding to a question on the chat, which is, how do you balance boards where everyone is split between the activist and the cautious, conservative person who said, hey, don't take on the administration, whether Lebanon. Hey, this is a risky investment. I think the best answer I've learned is to listen to everyone and do your best to arrive at a broad consensus and then accept responsibility for the decision. I want to just end this point by saying people should never forget, and I think most of us in leadership roles don't, that presidents and vice chancellors and principals and whatever titles we have, vice provost, we are expendable. The boards are not. We don't try to crash the car, but if we're making a mistake, we can be guided, corrected, or even replaced. If your board fails, that is a much bigger challenge. And so I'm all for collaborating with the board and coming to a consensus that's not too painful, that doesn't cause too much mental health distress, where we can be activist but not obstructionist or not overly aggressive, and to cut down on the number of fights we pick with outside entities and always frame them, as you just noted, Margee, as a way to move towards constructive dialogue with all parties.
Sorry, I want to make a very small point here. Thank you. Before we go to Dmytro, which is just on the mental health issue. I saw a question by Zarlash Sarmas there, who I know is doing really interesting research, which is looking at the impact of civic engagement on displaced and marginalized communities. And what's super interesting is to see both the academic benefits and the benefits in terms of sense of belonging, sense of community, connectedness, and sense of mental well-being. So I think that sometimes even the counterintuitive, to answer some of my own slightly provocative questions, I want to put that out there because it's really interesting, and I know the different communities here are working with displaced and otherwise marginalized students. Dmytro?
Thank you very much. Margee and Fadlo have really answered many points here. So thank you very much, and it's very inspirational. When it comes to mental health, for students in Burma, it's constant all the time, and so no surprise here. The university is contracted with a professional mental health counselor service provider to provide all these mental health counseling and therapy sessions for students one-on-one all the time. And after the earthquake, we have made it even more available to our students, unlimited. So, but always we have to be mindful that, a lot of the issues that we're dealing in our students' lives go beyond just, mental health counseling sessions, right? It's really structural, and long-standing issues. So the university has to be aware of the fact that these are long-standing issues that, we cannot just give them mental health counseling and be done with it. The university has to structurally design to provide a long-term recovery support for students as well. So that's something that I work on all the time. And when it comes to the board members, the board really the more, as I said, I'm still a very young president, and Parami's board is still very young in terms of its existence. But one thing the board, I think, needs to do, and the president or the CEO needs to help the board understand, is to do the constant assessment of the environment that the board has to deal with, right? So if the political situation, the environment is stable, fine enough to have a lot of risk takers on the board. But once you have a lot of instability that the board really needs to deal with, right? In the case of Parami, when Parami was founded, we already have a political coup, a military coup. And so all the board members who came on board, right, were not risk averse at all. They understand what they're dealing with. So I was very lucky to have all the board members that are not risk averse at all, right? They understand the context, they understand the situation. But once the university or the institution gets into the, comfort zone, right? When things are fine, and once you start to have a board members that are risk averse, then, once you get back into a turmoil situation, right, you're really going to have problems. So my suggestion is, as the CEO, as the president, have to constantly see what the environment is so that you can really shape the composition, help shape the composition of the board to meet the needs. And one question that I see here, how do you see the role of a university president evolving, not just as an institutional leader, but as a moral voice? And to me, that's really important. I talk about principles and pragmatic. And here, as an institutional leader, you're not just serving the university, because you're really producing the leaders that you're trying to put into the world that you are living in, right? And so if the university leader is not walking the talk, the students are not going to be inspired, and they're not going to come out of the university as a competent and responsible leaders. That they're always going to be, individuals who are always going to question their stances all the time. So they will look up to the university leaders, and I think the university leaders have a major role to play when it comes to serving as a moral voice, to serve as an inspirational voice as well. So yeah, thank you, Jonathan.
Dmytro?
Yeah, thank you. So, and thank you, dear colleagues, for bringing this knowledge. I just feel that I'm studying every minute more and more. Yeah, so probably it's hard to add something, but generally, I just want to say that answering your question, Jonathan, that the networking is definitely important. So, and the collaboration is important, and the hand of help is really important. So just an example, but when we feel that our institutions are pretty secure, we can handle like the educational process. So we formed with a few Ukrainian institutions the Alliance of Ukrainian Universities. That's a type of consortia that, and we proclaimed that we are uniting our efforts like to help communities. Just for you imagine, there are like 4 state-owned institutions, there are 2 private institutions, there are 2 technical universities there, some only 6 members, and 2 classical and 2 absolutely non-classical is a private, more liberal arts institution. And yeah, so we are really different, but like this mission, this understanding that we want to do something that helps a lot. And afterwards, my institution, my university, so we are more about humanities and social sciences. So we don't have like the technical education. So we have applied sciences, but don't have like the engineering school or whatever. And when we face the needs for communities to have engineering, to help with the projects that involves engineers, so that alliance is really helpful because we can address to our partners saying, can you help with, I don't know, with a cogeneration station that will produce heat for the schools or kindergarten. So there's a perfect role to think not about the competence, but I like the English word like competition. So that's cooperation and competition at the same time. So when you understand what is your strengths, but what is your weakness, and when you have your partners to help within this weakness. So that I think the true partnership is made. So what we can do more with your question, I think we can practice more. So what is important to practice more? And if we are talking together, but today, but I think that we speak the same language. So I think that we face the same troubles in our communities. And I think, for example, COILs are wonderful initiatives, so collaborative line international learning. So we can study from the comparative perspectives and add a lot to understanding probably some of the resolutions that are hidden in the practice of the other nations. And it's like a click, so you can introduce that. So I think that that's important to act, to do something, and we have this virtual possibilities that could be introduced, and later on, like some faculty-led programs that could be added. So I'm talking like this is a plan already, and that's a very small steps that actually eventually can bring to something greater. So I think that we should enjoy, and we should bring to our agenda some small steps that can later on bring something more. And answering like the questions that here in the chat. So I probably can't reflect like what is meant to be the presidential, but I think this question is really great. So not to be only institutional leader, but to be the moral voice. So usually universities are trusted. Yeah, universities are trusted, and the people are trusted. So different level in different societies, but I think that's what are like societal expectations from the university leaders to not to be like the moral leaders. Yeah, it's hard, and I know it's needed, but to speak, not to hide the truth. And especially the overall the history of Ukraine, and especially the history of my institution of Ukrainian Catholic is based on the martyrs and marginalized, and martyrs in Greece. It's actually in Greek language. So in Greek language, it's actually the person who speak, the person who witness. So I think that's important, like to witness and to speak. And I think that the universities and academic communities have a privilege to be those communities who can have the power of doubt, who have the power of discussion, who have the power and opportunity to speak on comfortable questions. And that's helped a lot to put this question. So I think that the only moral obligation is not to hide it's yourself. It's to speak, especially when the darkness is not allowing to speak. So that's important. Thank you.
Thank you. Uh-oh, I'm freezing again. Hopefully you can hear me. Good. We're running out of time, so I just want to say two things. One of them is just per the COIL, I would say my happiest moments every week are teaching with Aaron. We have this beautiful OSUN online class with students from Parami and from Uku and from across the OSUN network, from Bard, from Kyrgyzstan, from Afghanistan. And we've met with students from AUBG. We've met with faculty and folk from AUB. It's an incredible learning experience where students are learning with and from each other. And that is just fantastic. And I want to put a plug out for those of you watching that we're registering for this summer next year, a variety of those courses. I just want to I guess I want to touch on the question which some of you answered. You know, I know folk are looking at the chat, and just to put out a question and then to give you the platform to say whatever you want in response. One of them is about this leadership question, which a few of you answered, but what role can a university leader play right now? Should a university leader play, a university president more specifically, or senior official? And when should they be speaking out, I guess? And what goes through your mind when you're doing that? And then the other one is, how in this moment do we preserve academic freedom when governments are telling us not to teach certain things, right? And how do we go about addressing those things? And then just finally, if you wanna, we'll go one by one. If there's anything you want to say that you've heard, or anything you haven't had a chance to say, just put that out there. So with those guiding principles, we'll go to Margee first.
Oh, goodness, Jonathan. I'm learning so much from my colleagues on this call, and I hope we can stay in touch and share what we're learning with each other. I think we're in a different time. We're in a different moment in time, and maybe not everyone agrees with me. It's not just the conflict that we're seeing, but the pushback against our very basic values in many parts of the world. And all of us would agree that societies are peaceful and democratic when education is pervasive. And education has to be inquiry-based, and people have to be able to ask whatever questions they want. That's the basis of academic freedom. And so with that at risk in different parts of the world, I think for us as leaders, we have to have the moral courage to speak up when needed. Why? Not only because those values are important, we are modeling leadership for our students. And I go back to our students, and they're the ones that matter always. Of course, our faculty do. They're extraordinary teachers and researchers. But at this moment in time, I think young people are watching. What do we do next? How do we handle this stress and this environment that we're living in? And can we study this? And can we ask these questions? And we have to assure them that that's the right path and that we will support them. And all of us have missions as universities to support them. And then we all have our unique missions. Ours is to create democratic and ethical leaders and citizens. So for me, it's very clear what that implies. But I think, if we keep in mind, our students are watching, our communities are watching, who's going to stand up and protect and represent the values and the missions that are important for the world to move forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Fadlo?
Sure. Well, honestly, it's been a pleasure and an eye-opener. So my thanks to OSUN, to Margee, and to Dmytro, and to you, and to Aaron, Jonathan. Look, to cut to the chase, there has been this basic position taken by the founding fathers when they framed the Constitution, reiterated by Nelson Mandela and other admirable people, that an informed population, an educated population, is one that will appreciate and safeguard democracy. And I think we all jumped to the assumption that everyone would embrace democracy and that it was the perfect route, and that people would want education. And I think we got a little bit arrogant in assuming that everyone knew it, and it became almost like a doctrine of faith. That's where I suspect universities got into a little bit of trouble. You see the very alarming decline in the United States in confidence in higher education. That is eye-opening. Here you have the oldest democracy, and some 30 to 40% of people, tops, believe in and trust higher education. Wow. Why is that? That it would take too long to do a deep biopsy, but part of it is the role of the university and the way we communicate. And the reality is, to go back to something I said earlier, university leaders were largely silent, except on freebies like apartheid or George Floyd. And then all of a sudden, they had to make a statement on everything, which is problematic because I personally, even if it's controversial, don't think it's the role of the university president to, build the moral high ground on everything. We can be perfectly good role models by being quiet once in a while, right? By leading through action. There are times we need to speak up, and this may well be one of those times. What we can do that's more valuable than speaking up is to build confidence in a community who express a broad diversity of opinions. And we have probably not done that, at least to my satisfaction. I mean, for me, an idea, even a foolish idea, is much less dangerous if it sees the light of day, as opposed to bubbles and grows into a conspiracy theory. I think, what's the role of the university president? The role of the university president, yes, is to be a role model in some ways, but not to be the spokesman for the generation, not to weigh in with the definitive opinion, but to allow a really, really broad set of ideas to be challenged and not allow anyone to be humbled or humiliated for propagating ideas, even outrageous ideas. Some of these outrageous ideas actually become great ideas. Some of them are terrible and really deserve to go on into the scrap heap of history. I think we need to step back from our moral assumptions and our high ground and lead by example, open up the space, get people to cool down, engage as much as possible, and look forward to an era where, rather than debating with governments, be they totalitarian or democratic, through their threats and our counter threats to go to the media, we need to be able to talk to each other first and then to the broader community. And I really would encourage all of us to step back. I'm really inspired by the leaders I see, all 5 of you, even though Erin has hidden her screen. We can do better than we've done. We've done pretty good, and we're being unfairly portrayed, but we can do better, and we can ignore the ugliness and move forward in a role where we're facilitators, enablers, strongholds of free discussion and debate. And that's the best safeguard for academic freedom, if we show we're not afraid to discuss and debate anything.
Thank you. Dmytro?
Thank you. Thanks for broad-ranging, wide-ranging notes and conclusions. Perhaps I'll, from my part, I want to say that the issues of refugees, internally displaced, forcibly displaced communities are close to my heart, because I'm dealing with these students day in and day out. And many students in developed countries lose touch of the fundamental rights that they have taken for granted, right? That these, internally more than 120, right, forcibly, millions of forcibly displaced individuals worldwide are facing and fighting for. And so I applaud very meaningful initiatives by Open Society University Network on creating also online classes in which students from, refugee, internally displaced contexts get to meet and have a chance to share their experiences with students from developed countries who have sometimes, lost in a detached world where they don't see these, fundamental rights being eroded that much anymore. And so now this is almost like a reminder this time around that these are the things that they cannot take for granted. And so, Open Society online OSUN classes are really, really important in making sure that the students across the world are reminded of these fundamental rights that are really, really important for them. So thank you very much for creating these opportunities. I believe that OSUN classes not only just benefit students from developing countries, but really benefit developed countries as well on where they stand. Thank you.
There's no doubt about that. Dmytro?
Thank you so much once again. So I think it's a wonderful panel, and I'll try to be as short as possible. So I just want to comment that that indeed learning from each other is important. So networking is important, and for networking is important, we indeed need to have those people who are engaged and who are the people of hope. I think that's in these times it's much more important than ever. Seems like to be a person of hope. And the person of hope means to share hope, but also it demands it demands a lot. It demands patience, it demands sobriety, it demands action, it demands those things even in the times of despair. So and I think for the present, all the troubles and difficulties, the only thing that we really need to prioritize is to be such people of hope and to understand that the long game worth it, no matter how difficult it is. And if and I'm usually telling my students, so just imagine in the ancient times or in medieval times when people were building a church. So it was a very long process for hundreds of years, and probably you will not see the results of your work, but it's your hope that this work will be done properly, but it's also your responsibility to put the brick properly so the work will be done. So let's put these bricks properly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to I realize we're just over time, but this was a really inspiring and fulfilling conversation. I share the view expressed by many of the panelists that it would be lovely to keep it going in different forums. I'm still proud of an article I wrote a year ago, which is called Deeds, Not Words, which is talking about how what we do reflects on what we do and how that teaches our students about the importance of being engaged, not just as individuals, but as institutions. And I think the four panelists here reflect in their deeds, but also their words, a commitment which is inspiring to me and I think to others viewing this today. I want to thank Aaron Canan for putting this wonderful panel together, and the whole group which has dealt with leadership in a time of crisis, and Universities of First Responders, who's done a wonderful job, and thank you all. Aaron, do you have any last comments, or are we okay? Aaron is
No, I just want to thank everybody and just feeling very inspired. Thank you.
We will be in touch soon, and for those of you who put things in the chat, I think we addressed many of them, and you can get in contact with us separately, and we'll try to follow up if you have further questions. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you all. Very, very enlightening and enjoyable. It's not that common. It's both. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
You all.